Thank you very much. We're here, I want to acknowledge, on the unceded traditional territory of Wasanik peoples. We acknowledge their generosity. Haishka Siam. We are also here within days of the federal election results. So it's only 3 days later, but I've already had a phone conversation with the Prime Minister. I've had a number of efforts to reach other leaders. But it seemed to me that in all the speculation that's going on, we should start with an effort at finding common ground. And that's the purpose of the letter that I sent today to Prime Minister Trudeau, copied to the other opposition leaders, to M. Scheer, M. Blanchet, M. Singh, avec quelques idées pour mettre sur pied un système qui est capable de marcher ensemble dans un Parlement minoritaire. So in a minority parliament, we now have some sense of the way things are shaping up. We know from Prime Minister Trudeau that the Liberals intend to govern without any formal or informal efforts at coalitions, but on an issue-by-issue basis. On that basis, I wanted to repeat, as do, of course, Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin, with whom we've reviewed, of course, our shared position as Greens in Parliament. We cannot vote confidence at any point on a confidence motion in a government that fails to have a climate target that's grounded in science and consistent with what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we must do. That's clear. On doit avoir un gouvernement qui était absolument engagé en accepter la science de GIEC. On doit mettre sur pied un nouveau cible pour le gouvernement du Canada avant le moment de début des prochaines négociations le 2 décembre. So I wanted to underscore for Prime Minister Trudeau and for other opposition leaders, and especially for civil society organizations that are looking for ways to push this government to make a difference, that Canada needs to change our climate target before December 2nd. That is the next negotiation. It's COP25 in Santiago, Chile. And I think it's important to underscore that there is no need for Parliament to meet for Trudeau to remove the Harper target and put in a target that's consistent with science. Our current target, 30% below 2005 by 2030, is the target left behind by Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper put that target in place with no vote in Parliament. It was a decision either of his cabinet or of the Environment Minister alone, so it doesn't require that Parliament convene or that any legislation be passed to pull our current target and put in place a target that works. And the target that works is at a minimum 45% below 2005 by 2030. The Green Party, analyzing that global target, knows that Canada must do more. Our target of 60% is our advice. But at a minimum, civil society organizations, climate groups that know the vast majority of Canadians voted for climate action should focus on this, that we need to change our target in time for the negotiations in Chile so that Canada can play a leadership role in pushing other countries to do more. Now, that is the first primary position of Greens. We can't vote confidence. We can, however, and this letter sets out a number of areas where we have common ground. I would say on the issue of single-use plastic items, that's something that seems to have the attention of almost every party in the House. C'est pour la question de l'interdiction des plastiques à usage unique constituait l'un de ces points d'accord avec les libéraux, puis NPD, puis les Verts, aussi les conservateurs. Tout le monde en parlait de la nécessité de protéger les océans contre les plastiques, les déchets plastiques. So there's an area of common ground potentially. There's also, although it doesn't include the Conservatives, a vast degree of consensus among those votes that constitute the majority in favor of pharmacare. Now, the Liberals, the New Democrats, the Greens talked about pharmacare. We would like to push that we accept the Hoskins report, which was commissioned by the previous Parliament, previous Liberal administration in the 42nd Parliament, accept the advice of Dr. Hoskins and move as quickly as possible to universal single-payer pharmacare across Canada. Why can't we commit to that and make sure that Canadians see progress on that, even in a minority parliament? We also, of course, there are a number of other issues, mental health, concerns with the opioid crisis. We should be able to work together to make progress. And also, of course, on the pressing issues of Indigenous rights. I think it's very significant. We actually moved our press conference for this morning with the very exciting news that thanks to the pressure from the BC Greens and the context of their confidence and supply agreement with the New Democrats, we have had today entered into the BC legislature the first provincial legislation that will make British Columbia the first province in Canada that operates under the terms of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's historic. It's important. Let's follow the BC legislature and in our federal parliament bring forward legislation that makes the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples the law of the land in Canada. Let's do that in a minority parliament. And let's also immediately begin the work of responding to the inquiry on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That inquiry and following its recommendations was part of our platform as Greens, was mentioned by the New Democrats. The Liberals said, we'll study it, we need to review it. Well, let's make that a priority item. I marched just this last Sunday with many victims, families, of missing, murdered women and girls in Canada, in Vancouver on Sunday in the pouring rain. The stories are always heart-wrenching. They're waiting and waiting to see justice. Let's make that a priority issue in a minority parliament. We also turn to areas of democratic reform. Even though it was really only the Greens that pushed hard for electoral reform in this election, I want to go back to Justin Trudeau's promise of 2015 and recognize that in this election, if Canadian voters ever needed evidence of how skewed and bizarre our voting system is, nothing makes the point as much as Greens getting over 1 million votes, 1.1 million votes. The Bloc Québécois got 1.3 million votes. They got 32 seats. We got 3. That's a direct result of the way in which the popular vote is skewed from the seat count. So we do need to revisit electoral reform. I think a lot of Canadians, and no offense to Mr. Blanchet, I look forward to working constructively with the Bloc MPs in the House. But let's face it, we have a voting system that gives parties that are divisive and separatist a better shot at electing seats than parties that are national, across the country, with strength everywhere. We had 50 different ridings across Canada get more than 10% of the vote, many above 20 and 30% with close second place finishes. That's why in winner-take-all systems, those votes, second place, third place, over 10%, didn't count towards the seat count. So I'm proposing to Mr. Trudeau, having thought long and hard about the reasons he put forward for breaking his promise for electoral reform in 2015. I've listened to what he said. He seems to be very fixated on one kind of proportional representation system, mixed member proportional, that would allow at a certain percent of the popular vote a right to seats. There are other systems, and I suggest to Mr. Trudeau that we should work, and I know the NDP says they want proportional representation. The Conservatives have no position on it, but the majority of Conservatives, the Conservative vote on our electoral reform committee, voted for a proportional representation system. Let's build on what we did in that committee, where we had a majority consensus report to move to PR. Let's make it single transferable vote. Be full disclosure here, that's not the Green Party's favorite position. We are in favor of mixed member proportional. But if Mr. Trudeau's problem with proportional representation is the idea that a percent of the vote nationally gives you a right to seats, let's go with STV, the system that the Citizens' Assembly in British Columbia originally recommended, and by ranked ballots. That's the other thing Justin Trudeau says he wants, is ranked ballots. So let's eliminate the thing he thinks is bad for our democracy and go with ranked ballots in a single transferable vote system. Let's work on that and make sure 2019 is the last election held under first past the post. We also believe that the experience of this election campaign with smears and attacks and negativity, outright lies, really should be dealt with. And in the Elections Act, we need a reform that requires truth in advertising. We would require that of people trying to sell us a cream, miracle creams, truth in advertising. I think all parties would, and I think the electorate would appreciate truth in advertising, keep campaigns positive and focused on honest explanations of where each party stands. So that would be an amendment to the Elections Act that I would love to see cooperation and consensus around that. Lastly, in my letter to the Prime Minister, I call again for respect in the House of Commons, for an end to heckling. Each party leader can control their own caucus and ask people to be respectful. And in working together, we also repeat the call for an internal cabinet built on the model of the war cabinets of of Mackenzie King and Winston Churchill in the Second World War. Let's find a way to work together to ensure that our action on the climate is not treated as a divisive regional issue, but in fact an issue where all party leaders working together accept the science and move together to ensure that we have policies that stand the test of partisanship in the next election. So with that, I'm going to close our opening statement. I'm passing the phone back to Alexa to control. I hope that the reporters who are on the phone managed to hear my opening statement. I'll pass it back. And any questions from anyone here in the room?
How do you,
Can you control the phone? Oh, there, okay.
you increased your seat total, but just by one. How do you think 3 people in the House of Commons is going to have any influence?
Well, I think the measurement is how much we increased our seat total over the last general election. The by-election, May 6th, it was great. I had Paul Manley with me for 1 month out of the last 4 years. So for me, it feels like tripling the seat count. And I'm particularly pleased, of course, that Jenica Atwin from Fredericton represents a leap out of British Columbia in terms of elected Greens into the House of Commons. Well, the last 8 years, the majority of which I was by myself in Parliament, I have to say that one MP can do quite a lot if you're prepared to work really hard and are familiar with the rules of procedure in the House. I've had 2 pieces of legislation passed since I was elected in 2011. Legislation I introduced as a private member's bill, both are now law. So I know we can do a lot. We can do 3 times as much as I could do by myself. And I'm looking forward to it. Certainly, Paul Manley was very active. As a party that doesn't have official party status, we have no right to take the floor and speak. I think it's important for voters in Nanaimo Ladysmith to know that in the 1 month that Paul Manley was in the House of Commons as the MP for Nanaimo Ladysmith, without the same rights that his predecessor, Sheila Malcolmson, had in that same period of time from the previous year, he spoke in the House on multiple issues as often as his predecessor. Now, that's a real accomplishment. It takes being there. It takes working hard. We will be very effective on committees working to amend legislation. But I think our largest role as Greens is going to, since we don't have the numbers to deny the Liberals a vote they want, they'll be able to pick their dancing partners. Sometimes the Bloc will prop them up. Sometimes the NDP will prop them up. Sometimes the Conservatives will prop them up. Because the bottom line is, for those big parties, all they care about is winning. They've forgotten why. And when they look at the question of, do we bring down this government on principle, before deciding where their principles are, they'll check their bank account. If they don't have money for another election campaign, they'll find some way to prop up the Liberals again and again. So it will probably be a lot like what we saw from Harper from 2006 to 2008, from 2008 to 2011, hanging on to power in a minority situation by playing one party off against the other. So what's our role as Greens, since we do stand on principle, is that we have to continue to be what I'm honored to have found multiple times, people referring to the Greens' role in the House of Commons as being the conscience of Parliament. So we will continue as the conscience of Parliament. We also know that voters understand, and I think members of Parliament across party lines understand, that if there's a party that really has a grip on climate science, it's Greens. So our work is to continue to push by every means possible that we take appropriate climate action. And as I've underscored in this letter today to Mr. Trudeau and other party leaders, we can do it before the next conference of the parties, which opens in early December in Chile. So I think we'll play a very large role. And I should mention that I'm so relieved that Jody Wilson-Raybould held her seat as an independent member in that period of time when I sat with Jody in the last Parliament. we did a lot of things together. We will continue to work together because her voice as a very important member of Parliament representing, and certainly with a record of ethics and integrity second to none, it's easier for her as an independent to also work with the three Greens so that we can take advantage as much as possible of the rules that are available to us as parliamentarians.
Elizabeth, you mentioned that you already talked with the Prime Minister. What, if any, what did he say to your demands, and what, if any, response have you received to the letter so far? And why sort of hand out a laundry list of demands? Why not focus on one or two demands, like, for example, the climate change issue?
Well, first of all, I had a very good conversation with Justin Trudeau, despite all the reasons that that I'm massively disappointed in his performance as Prime Minister since 2015. We remain friends, and I think that's a good thing across party lines, to always try to keep lines of communication open based on respect. So I wouldn't betray that respect by quoting what he said to me on a phone call. We had a good, positive, productive phone call. He knows where Greens stand on climate, and he knows that there are areas where we'd like to work together. I did stress with him the pending negotiations in Chile, the importance of pulling our target, the importance of having the right target in place. And I can say, without betraying a confidence, because it's been so clear in his public statements, that he's preoccupied with Alberta and Saskatchewan and the fact that there are no Liberals elected from those provinces. I would say publicly now that it's past time for Liberals to stop pandering to climate deniers. That is not leadership. I saw Chrétien do it in '93. The Liberal Red Book in 1993 had significant climate promises that were turfed when Anne McClellan won a seat in Edmonton by a handful of votes. The Liberals keep making this mistake that by building a pipeline, they think they'll get votes in Alberta. It sure didn't work on Monday. Could Justin Trudeau have been any clearer that he wanted the Trans Mountain Pipeline before Monday? He's bought it. We spent $4.5 billion on a 65-year-old leaky pipeline. Now he's promising to spend a further $10 to $13 billion of public funds on a project that makes no economic sense, that doesn't gain him seats in Alberta, and which blows through any climate target. It's a disaster, and it shouldn't be built. We will continue to oppose it vigorously. But I know that the current attitude is, and the media promotes this as well, that somehow as a matter of national unity, we have to waste $10 to $13 billion on a project that does not diversify markets. It's just to get raw bitumen to the U.S. They leave any Aframax tankers leaving Burnaby today are primarily destined to California. They're not heading to Asia. So everything that the public has been told about the economic benefits of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is all propaganda, and it doesn't stand up to any test against actual evidence of where the tankers currently go, where the market is. But more fundamentally, investing in fossil fuels is not only morally irresponsible, it's an economic disaster. I mean, Mark Carney just said last week the fossil fuel companies are going to go bankrupt. Why on earth would we take public funds on a pipeline? In any case, Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party seem committed to a very flawed decision, and we oppose them, and we'll continue to oppose the pipeline because we must have climate action.
If you permit a follow-up, it also says in the letter we also overlap on reducing cell phone charges.
Yeah.
Are you trying to troll the New Democrats here?
No.
You've talked about, you've made the point earlier that Jack Minsing
Yep.
lowered the bar
Yeah.
on cell phone rates, for example. That was one of the conditions that you
Yes.
discussed. Is an attempt to troll here the New Democrats?
Oh, no, it's our policies called for reducing cell phone rates in our platform, too. I did find it bizarre that when Jagmeet Singh set out conditions for joining a coalition, basically was bargaining for getting a seat at the cabinet table, and put out what his conditions were. He didn't put out stopping Trans Mountain. He didn't put out electoral reform. He put out a weak set of demands on climate that you could see the Liberals might have accepted, and reducing cell phone rates. I mean, in our top list of demands, that would not be a top list to support. And even if they lower cell phone rates, we're not going to vote confidence in the government until they meet climate action. So, no, it wasn't an attempt. It was looking for where is their common ground. And these are things Canadians care about, dealing with affordability. Cell phone rates are, I think, at this point, low-hanging fruit. Most parties agree. Yes?
It's more of a respect question for women in politics and
Yep.
women in a political venue. You've heard about what happened to Catherine McKenna.
Yes.
What's your feelings on that, and do you think women get the respect they deserve?
Well, I think that any woman in public life would answer the question the same way I will. Absolutely not. Women in politics are treated differently than men in politics. We're subjected to misogyny and abuse on a daily basis, particularly in social media, particularly with graffiti. And I would also say that the other party leaders have a lot to answer for, because when I look back over this election, a pivotal change point in the fortunes of the Greens was when the TVA debate went ahead without me on stage. That's when Monsieur Blanchet and the Bloc took off. There was no rationale to excuse a private commercial television station in Quebec being able to choose to exclude the Green Party. It was appalling, and it wouldn't have happened if Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Scheer and Mr. Singh hadn't been willing to say, we'll show up, we don't care if the Green Party's not there. We don't mind if there's no woman on stage. So again, if we're going to eliminate sexism in politics in Canada, it does take the other parties standing up to something more than lip service about being feminists.
Let me ask this question. Did your office or any other members of your party experience something like what Minister McKenna experienced, I guess yesterday?
Yeah, well, we have had a lot of graffiti. We haven't had we had offices robbed, but that didn't leave graffiti behind. We had several offices broken into. But in terms of misogynistic, insulting epithets, constantly on social media, every day. Yeah. And we're very proud of the fact that we had such a strong slate of women candidates. And speaking of women in politics, this is another historic breakthrough for Greens. We're the first party entering Parliament with more women than men in our caucus. Except for when I was there by myself, of course. But with an elected Green caucus. Yes, and we've spoken with Jenica already. Okay. We've spoken with Jenica about taking on a role of critic for intergovernmental affairs and advocate for Atlantic Canada. That allows her to play a role, particularly given her background in First Nations issues and governance, so that she could be taking on those questions of federal-provincial cooperation, nation-to-nation relationships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit with the federal government, and being an advocate for Atlantic Canada. With only 3 MPs, we'll be covering a lot of ground, each one of us, but Jenica Atwin is joining the shadow cabinet with that specific role. And we'll be convening as a caucus towards the end of next week in Ottawa. Paul Manley and Jenica and I will be there together. As a matter of fact, I'm getting on the train tomorrow. Via Rail service is so poor that if I don't get on the train tomorrow, I don't make it to Ottawa in time for a meeting that starts November 1st. So there you are. So we'll be together and assessing further roles. But I'm so excited. Jenica is such an exceptional candidate, and she'll be a wonderful member of Parliament. So at this point, Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin have never met except on the basis of a conference call I had with them yesterday. So we're very excited to get together as a powerful group of 3. I think this is a first we've ever had New Brunswick media
Adam,
coming
you
into our
I'll
city.
put you on speakerphone right now. Adam's got a
Yeah, Ms. Nace, to follow up.
Sure.
Do you think there's a learning curve there for Ms. Atwin, or do you expect her to, I guess, be frustrated into it?
There's a learning curve for every MP. In the other parties, and I don't mean to be unkind, but just so to give a picture of what it's like, when you're elected as a member of Parliament in the Liberals, the NDP, or the Conservatives, you're told you don't need to worry about learning the rules of Parliament. We've got people who handle that for you, and you don't have to read the legislation. We've got people who'll tell you about it. It's the opposite for Greens. Every single Green will be expected to have read the rules of parliamentary procedure, It's an 800-page book. We need to make sure we actually understand what our rights are as individual members of Parliament. We don't expect members of Parliament to vote because of the party telling us the way we're going to vote. We study the legislation. Now that there's 3 of us, we study it together. We will attempt, as caucuses of Greens do around the world, to achieve consensus on what we want to do with that legislation. There's always a learning curve. And I have to say, for Paul Manley, he had to hit the ground running. He got elected May 6th. He was sworn in May 28th. And immediately after being sworn in, I said, I've got 2 different committees. My legislation is clause by clause in 2 committees at once. Can you take the omnibus budget bill and the amendments I have to that? Here you go, because I've got to go do the Indigenous Languages bill. So I have to say, Paul's learning curve was steeper than Jenica's will be. There's much more time for Jenica to work with Paul and me. She has to set up her constituency office, get a Parliament Hill office running, and she'll have all of our support, but she won't have direction. She'll be able to decide for herself what her priority issues are, what she wants to work on, what she wants to accomplish on behalf of the people of Fredericton. Is that okay, Adam? Okay. Next question?
Hi, Tom Korski with Blacklock, Ms. May.
Hi, Tom.
I'll keep it short. Hi, I'll keep it short, and please keep your answer short because I know others are waiting. I want to just nail this down. I'm not being flippant. When you say we're not going to vote confidence in the government until they take climate action, I just want to make sure that I understand that is an absolutely definitive statement. So it doesn't, I'm not a fortune teller. If there's a Sunday night emergency meeting of Parliament because there was a 9-measurement earthquake that took out Vancouver, or there's a big 5 bank that collapses due to malfeasance and fraud, or there's North Korean missiles coming over the North Pole, you will not vote a confidence motion on that bill if they don't have a climate action plan at 45%. Is that correct?
Well, 60% would be better, but the point is none of the things you've mentioned are confidence motions. So let's be clear what a confidence motion is. The speech from the throne, a budget bill. There's no way that we will vote confidence in a government that is setting a course for the collapse of human civilization within the lifetime of our children. Ian Bailey? Okay, Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail, your turn.
Do you think that Jagmeet Singh, who is obviously is leading a caucus much larger than yours, should be more definitive in using his leverage to order the Prime Minister to stop the expansion of Trans Mountain?
Well, of course, the NDP have had a tumble from 3rd place party in the House to 4th place party in the House. I don't know that Mr. Singh has deep principles on these issues, but if he has claimed that the NDP is against the Trans Mountain Pipeline, he should be definitive and he should be prepared to go to the wall to stop it. I haven't seen that in his public statements.
That's my question here, Maura Forrest from the National Post.
Hi, Maura.
Hi, Maura. Hi. I know you've been asked about this before, but I'm just not quite clear on your answer. With regards to your own leadership of the Green Party, what are your thoughts on that right now, and how likely are you to lead the Green Party in the next election?
I thought I'd been clear, but thank you, Maura, for giving me a chance to clarify. Assuming the next election, which I don't think we can, given a minority parliament, things could be precarious. But if we take it as the assumption behind your question that we're talking about a federal election on a fixed election date of October 2023, I think the chances are very slight that I would be leading the Green Party into an election in 2023. If the next election is spring of 2020, I think it's more likely I would be leading the Green Party into that election. I remember very clearly, as people my age will remember, others won't, that in 1979 when Joe Clark formed government, Pierre Trudeau stepped down. When Alan J. McCacken played his genius in Parliament and brought down Joe Clark's government after 9 months, Pierre Trudeau said, okay, not resigning after all, I'm back, I'm leader, we're going into a snap election. And as we say, the rest is history. My view is that my role as leader is not a decision I make alone. It's very important that Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin have a key role in deciding when they think it's a good time to have an interim leader, how much they want me to continue as leader in a minority parliament to establish at least by the ways in which we can work together. Taking a leadership role on that, I think, is important. So I don't think I will stay on as leader for 4 more years. I will run again, I hope, as long as my health holds up. I'd love to be the Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands for another term, and I'd love to work with another leader who can lead the Green Party into the next decade. I think it's very unlikely that I'd want to continue if we're talking about 2023, but for the near term, I think it's very important for the health of the party that I continue as leader. Does that help? Thank you, Maura. Et en anglais qui était envoyé aujourd'hui à M. Trudeau, puis aussi à M. Scheer, Blanchet et Singh pour expliquer la façon de travailler ensemble que je vais. And we worked really, I know my volunteers worked so hard, particularly when I was across the country working in other ridings, and I'm very glad that I got to Fredericton as often as I did. And the second place finishes in Beausejour and elsewhere across the country, Guelph, Kitchener Centre, hard-fought campaigns by lots of volunteers. So we will be getting together over coming weeks to talk about what we do for next time, how we build on the success of having 50 different campaigns get more than 10% of the national vote, of their local vote, and certainly an increase of our popular vote of 87% is nothing to sneeze at. So I'm very, very grateful to all the volunteers who made the successes of the 2019 campaign possible. Thank you all so much. Merci tout le monde. Thanks so much.